All right, so as we were saying a little bit ago, we're going to talk about adaptations to cold. You know, those things that Nyla does not have yet.
It's getting there. It's just when we went from hot to now super cold, it's gonna take a while for me to adjust.
Well, I'll give you a spoiler alert. It takes about a week and a half to 2 weeks for your body to adapt to exercising in cold or hot. About a week and a half to 2 weeks. So like if you want to go train for a run that you're going to have in a certain temperature, you want to be in that environment 1 to 2 weeks before to get your body used to handling that much heat or cold depending on where you're running. Boston Marathon is in October in Boston. How warm do you think it is? Yeah. It's actually, but that's better for running and physical adaptations. So that's why it was done, and the world record was set there because it's a cooler environment than trying to do it in summer at the Olympics. So like you won't probably see the world record broken at the Olympics because their bodies have not adjusted to it yet. Let's see if it's going to let me move to the next slide here. There we go. So there's just my introduction there. So today we're talking all about body regulations. So humans are homeothermic, as in they want to keep their body at the same temperature. And it's got a lot of different ways that it can do that. So the internal body temperature is regulated by nearly constant despite the environmental changes. So it can be 110 outside in Arizona. I've done that. And your body will relatively stay close to the 98.5 that it needs to be in order to operate properly. It's going to do everything in its power to cool itself off. And then we're talking at the moment just like if you're sitting there, not quite exercising. They call it thermal regulation. It involves regulating the body from a physiological set point, and that's what we're going to pretty much talk about today. The stress of physical exertion is very complicated, and we're going to go into all those details. So some other terms here. Acclimation is the short term. So this would be a day or a week. And then acclimatization is long-term adaptation. So as we were joking about, the Hawaiian has not quite gotten the acclimatization to being in cold weather. So, right, I make fun of my in-laws because they're all from Florida. So when they come and visit us, they are used to hot, muggy, and they come here and it's dry and chilly, and they freeze. So it just makes me laugh. Or vice versa. My family is from Nebraska, where they're talking about snow this weekend, and I've definitely had weekends. We've had the mayor has canceled Halloween trick-or-treating because it's been that cold. Granted, the one year they did that, I had the best cold weather costume for a blizzard. I was an M&M. And I probably had 2 feet of fluff all the way around me. So I was nice and toasty. I walked to our friends' houses that were nearby. You know, we trick-or-treated for like 5 houses just so I could have an excuse to wear that costume that they borrowed from somebody. Somebody the other day, I remember, was asking me, they were like, oh, it's 30 degrees Celsius. So here's the actual conversions equations there. That might be a quiz question. Hopefully the formula will be there so that you can do it. But the easiest way to probably think about it is either double it, add 32, or divide it by 2 and basically divide by 2 and 32. It's pretty close. So if like it's 100 degrees outside, Celsius would be divided by 2. It's going to go down to 50. Or take the number, subtract 32. So take it to like 67 and then divide it by 2 approximately. So 33 is what 100 approximately is. It's not perfect, but that's how I do it in my head, is if somebody's asking me what's the conversion, I just remember it's like subtract 32 and then divide by 2 approx, and then gets you pretty close there. So your metabolic heat production is going to go down. So your body actually creates heat. That's how we've already talked about, like ATP. When it breaks down, you're going to have your ADP to ATP plus heat. So that's how your body is going to actually keep itself warm, is it's going to break down more ATP in order to get more heat into the body. So 25% that's going to be the cellular work, and the other part's going to be the metabolic from the rest of your body. So this would be the cellular work would be more like in your mitochondria and stuff like that, where you're creating that heat. The transfer of heat between the body and the environment is going to be probably from taking the core heat. You're going to pump the blood closer to the skin so that the skin can then dissipate the heat through conduction, convection, radiation, and evaporation. I think we're going to go into all those details, so I don't need to talk about them totally yet. So here's kind of how you gain heat from the inside of your body, is your metabolic and then environment things. So usually most of this is going to be radiation from the sun, but it could also be radiation from other things. If we were in this room and the heater wasn't on, just because there are 15 of us in this room approximately, if we're in here for an hour, the average temperature of this room will rise just because of it radiating off of you or through your breathing. So the temperature is a little bit. Have you guys ever gone to a arena of some sort for a concert or a game of some sort? When you get there, is it warm or cold? It's generally slightly colder than you'd want it to be. That's because there's going to be X number of thousands of people in that arena, and the temperature is going to up because there are humans in the room. And since you're all in one giant room, it's going to get warmer and warmer and warmer the longer you're in there. So if you're in there for a 3-hour concert, it's by the end of it, you're not actually probably thinking about it, but the temperature has gone up. My parents, I remember, I don't know why this one came to mind to me, but my parents were inside talking after like church or choir practice, Pathfinder, something. It was nighttime. And my brother, me, and another guy were sitting in the car waiting for them to stop talking and come take us home. And I was probably, 5th grade. And we were there for probably half an hour, 45 minutes. And my dad, when he got there, opened up the car door and got in. He's like, man, it is a lot warmer in here. And it was just because we were sitting in the car in probably 40-degree weather, maybe less. The windows were all fogged up because we were all in there for 45 minutes, probably waiting for them to quit talking, because I don't know why, but my dad likes to talk. I don't know where he got it from. But yeah, so that was just from the people being in there and us breathing. The car was warm enough for him to close the door and be like, man, it's really warmer in here compared to outside. So those are all just some things that can happen. Moving along. So it can happen by conduction. So this would be transferring from one solid material to another. So if you're holding a bat, where your hands are will be warmer than the environment. If you have an object, I know like when you hand an object to somebody, they'll be like, wow, that is really warm because where you're sitting. If you go and move into a chair that someone hasn't been sitting in, it'll be colder than one that someone was sitting in. So it can be conduction from surface to surface. You'd have convection, which would be movement of gas or liquid across there. So this would be like the skin to the air. So when you're, so as you're saying, your bodies just warm up the air around you a little tiny bit there. That's a big thermoregulatory factor for you to use. Radiation, so this would be the sun mostly. The body can give or receive radiant heat there, and this is another. So your kind of main two are going to be convection and regulatory factor. Oh, I should have read this. Sitting on a chilly or hot metal bleacher. I've been to baseball games when I was growing up, and you did not want to sit in the outfield because one outfield had metal bleachers, and you would toast your cheeks when you sat down, or the other one had wood bleachers. And you wanted to be on the side that had wood bleachers because you knew you wouldn't be as burnt when you left. Also, the wooden bleachers had shade over it from trees. I do remember that as well. This would be in the College World Series Stadium in Nebraska is where I would go. So you'd always go to the College World Series game on the 4th of July because you wanted to see the 45-minute fireworks show that was afterwards. So that's the game that we always went to. So all those together are going to be ways of dry heat exchange. So still air is a layer of air is the ideal insulator. So that's why there is padding in your jacket. My jacket here has an insulator of, I don't know, it's some sort of foam. I got a rip in it. Oh, where's that rip at? There it is. So there's that little bit of fluff there. That is to create an air insulator between my skin and the outside. And that's why that thin jacket is actually too warm for a day like this. So this would be a thermo camera. I've actually seen you can get thermal cameras for your phones. It's actually something that like it plugs into the lightning port, but you can do this. And so that's something I want to look into for us. I don't know what the difference is other than it looks like that one's warmer. So this would probably be after exercise and this would probably be before exercise. This looks like from the back, this would be from the front. So you can see how their back is really, really red, where here it's kind of blue, so it's a little cooler. Oh, sorry. Nope, that would be hotter on that side. So that's just showing you where on the body you're going to be probably sweating more. So evaporation is probably the main way that we lose heat. So when it's too hot, you sweat. And there's a whole big equation here of how you would balance it. And these are all the different types we just talked about. So evaporation would be E, and back here a little ways. So radiation, conduction, convection, all those things together. There is a whole thing for heat gain, loss, and balancing. I don't think you actually need to know that. You just know that they all work together in order to do that. So the primary way we lose heat during exercise is about 80% is through evaporation. So you will have humidity and heat loss. We are in a fairly dry area. It's not the best one. I lived in Arizona for 2 years. We got there in July, probably, sometime in July. So we moved in, and I remember my dad was there helping us get everything set up because he had probably drove us there. And we went to Home Depot. And my wife is just like, I'm so tired. And I figured it was from working so hard. And I was like, it's really dry here. I wonder. So I actually went at Home Depot and bought a bottle of water, gave it to her. Said, go sit over in somewhere near the checkout area was all the outdoor furniture, but it was inside. So they were in air conditioning, and it's 110 probably there. And she sat down, drank a bottle of water, and it was like a switch went off. She went from exhaustedly tired to, all right, I'm ready to help. What do we need to do? I'm like, and that was in the time for me to like go and get some screws or something for a project in the house that we were putting things in. She was dehydrated. And she rehydrated. So her symptom when she gets dehydrated, she gets sleepy. So like when you're hiking, in our case, for her especially, if she's hiking and all of a sudden she's like, man, I feel like I could just go to sleep right now. You're dehydrated. Oh yeah. And then drink something. So when there is a very low humidity, you don't even realize you're sweating and losing all that liquid. I walked around everywhere in Arizona with a water bottle. I had water bottles stashed in my classroom, in my office, in my car, just so that we always had water because I wouldn't even realize that I had lost so much liquid. So that's the main, and then the opposite would be cooling from sweat. You can lose 1.5 liters of sweat in an hour probably. There, so if air temperature is greater than the skin temperature, conduction will work, and it will depend on how much evaporation is going on. So here's what that would look like for a football player. Oh man, has anybody seen the new football helmets where they have these like extra pads on the helmets, and they were like, it reduced how many concussions happened in training camp by like 80% or something like that? It looks weird, but it also looks really hot. Because now they're getting no ventilation on the outside of those helmets. So like in practice, they're wearing a helmet and then like a cap on top of the helmet. So here's where all that heat's going in. So the red ones, I believe, is the heat coming in. So the sun is going to be bringing it in. Your clothing is going to be holding in heat. You're going to have convection from here, radiating up through the ground. And turf, like new turf now, is actually worse than grass. because it's going to reflect it off and into you. And they're trying different things like the rubber pellets. They've tried different colors of pellets to try to reduce how much was reflecting off and onto your body there. And then it's going to evaporate through the sweat glands. You're going to have respiratory heat exchange. Animals are much better at that than humans. Humans get a little bit of it, but like dogs, that's like their main way of regulating their heat. Dogs don't sweat. Neither do pigs. So when a dog gets hot, their mouth is open, they're drooling because that's their main way of regulating heat. And then just metabolic heat production from your muscles are going to raise the heat. Woo, I need to keep moving. So if conduction and evaporation are unlimited, you could withstand 200 degrees of heat. Probably the only place you're going to see that is on the surface of the sun, but that's if those things were unlimited, and they're not. That's the problem. So briefly, you can withstand a core temperature of 35 degrees Celsius as to around a little, anywhere between above 35, it's probably about 100 to 120, somewhere in between there. And that's me doing that whole conversion in my head there I was just telling you about. Add 32, or double it and then add 30. So that's approximately. So for normal body and air temperatures, the core temperature is regulated to about 37, so that'd be 98.5. Your core temperature needs to be less than 40. Anything that goes above 40 is going to create physiological function. So it'd be like when you have a fever of 103. Would be 100 over 40. That's when you have to take your child to the hospital because their fever is too much and a kid can't regulate their own body heat, so they need to get it down. I remember my parents putting me in a lukewarm bath, and to them it felt lukewarm. To me it felt freezing when I had a fever because they were trying to get my mom's a nurse, so they didn't want to take me to the ER immediately. They're like, we're going to try everything first. But I didn't get sick very often, so that only happened like 1 or 2 times. By the way, don't recommend doing that unless you're medically trained to try to get your kid's temperature down. So POA, I'm not even going to try to say that one, is the body's thermostat in the brain. So the hypothalamus is your body's thermostat. It receives input from your body's thermoreceptor and says we need to either sweat or we need to either warm up the body if it's too cold. Most of this we're talking about just generals here. Your sensory perceptors are in your skin. That's why you feel cold. Your brain and your spinal cords are the ones that are going to tell the rest of the body if they're too hot or too cold. So, some of you here are sitting here cold and you're just automatically trying to stay warm. Some people are too warm and are wearing shorts in here and they're all sprawled out and trying to cool off. And those are just things you're doing unconsciously to try to warm or cool yourself. So here's what that would look like in a graph. So the internal body increases, and so the brain says through the hypothalamus that something needs to happen. Vasodilation occurs, and sweat glands become more active. They get, for hopefully evaporation, where 80% of it is, and the body is going to decrease. And then the body will then tell the brain, whoops, is good, do it again, or, oh, we're fine, stop. So that's why when you're exercising, you sweat a bunch, and when you're done, you stop sweating. And it doesn't just keep going and going and going. And here's how it would go the opposite way there. So when you start exercising, your muscles start grabbing things, your blood through your skin is going to start warming up, and the body temperature increases. We'll keep on going there. So that hypothalamus signals the sympathetic nerve system. That's the one that's going to do something. So the skin areoles are going to dilate or constrict to either enhance heat loss or to minimize heat loss. Your sweat glands are obviously going to work, and there's some actual numbers here. Acetylcholines are going to be working there. More responsive changes to core and skin temperatures. Your skeletal muscles are going to create more heat when they're working. Your endocrine glands are going to increase the metabolism to increase heat production to hopefully cool your body. And yeah, when you exercise in the heat, your heat load's going to increase from the environment. So I always use Arizona as the example, but here's not too far off. It's still fairly dry here in comparison. I just came from Mississippi a year ago, and that's the polar opposite. It's so humid there that the moment you walk outside, you immediately start sweating. And like there's just not even... I almost think that the air is so wet that it just sticks to your skin. Kind of like when you walk outside and you got glasses when it's cold. They fog up when that's what I think it happens in Mississippi because it was just so humid there. So your cardiovascular function, your skin arterioles are going to vasodilate to hopefully get some heat loss. Your hypothalamus tells the nervous system, and your blood volume is actually going to go down. So remember yesterday we were talking when you exercise, your blood volume increases with the plasma and your heart gets more efficient when it pumps. Well, when you start sweating, that blood volume is going to decrease. So now your heart has to pump harder in order to keep the blood moving and to regulate either hot or cold for your body. So the more you sweat, that's why you need to drink liquid, is to replenish that so the blood can keep pumping and keep cooling the body or heating the body, whichever way it needs to go. So that's one major reason. I think I got a graph coming up here in a little bit that shows that. So there are some limitations to your cardiovascular system can overload. When my wife's cardiovascular system overloads, she almost passes out. Like she feels dizzy and has to sit down. She does not exercise in heat well. Like when we were trying to go running, we first got married, we went to Florida for the summer, and we tried to run outside in the summer, and even in the mornings or in the evenings, and we couldn't even get a mile run in, and she would be like having to sit down and be like, I'm going to pass out. I'm like, wow. Like her body just get hit. She hits a limit, and I was just like, I'm good. That is not the case anymore. She's in better shape than me. At the time, I was in great shape when I got married and was playing sports and everything consistently. Your brain actually shuts down at about 40 to 41 degrees Celsius. So that's when your body gets too hot. So there's some well-trained, high athletes can go above that, but generally that's kind of like where your body's just done. So this would be the exercise temperature compared, so 26 would be 78 degrees and 43 is the blue, so that'd be 110. So this would be the temperature, the rectal temperature, and that is fairly normal actually in our world. As it goes up, as we said, it has to keep under 40. So there's how much it goes up compared to the VO2 liters per minute. So it doesn't go up very much at all in 78 degrees, but in 110, whoo, that goes up real quick. How much blood you have, your stroke volume per beat. When it's hotter, it's thinner, so there's less blood, and so your blood pressure is lower. Your heart rate obviously goes up really quick when you're in a hot environment, and your cardiac output. Notice in the hot, it stopped early. As in, they got to the point where they couldn't go anymore, much faster on the hot than when it was cooler. They could continue a lot longer. So it's like that would stop short on the test. So like they got to the point of exhaustion a lot faster when it's hot, obviously. But it's interesting when that's actually shown by the data. So some added effects of dehydration. I kind of already talked about this. So all these things are going to go on here. Small reductions in blood volume and blood pressure. Say as blood gets thinner because you're losing it. Some reductions in stroke volume and cardiac output. Say I pretty much talked about that. We're going to keep on going. So purposely lowering your core temperature before you exercise is something that people do. So they'll either do like an ice bath and then go work out, so that you can start with a lower core temperature before you go. I've heard of distance runners doing this on purpose when they know they're going to be exercising in a really hot, and this would be for training, not for an event. Like they would train to try to learn to train their body. So either a cold shower, I've seen cooling vests, or the best one, cold drinks. So you can improve your sports performance, especially during a big event or an endurance event. There actually is talk that it could be detrimental to have cold water immersion and then go do a 100-yard dash. It actually will slow you down rather than speed you up. But when it comes to running a marathon, if you started with a lower core body temperature, you're going to take longer to get to that plateau spot, and so you'll be faster at the beginning of the race, is what the thought process is. So your physiological responses to exercise, I'm going to say let's take a standing break. I think I have one coming, but we've been going for 20 minutes. Take a standing break. We just changed topics. be really cool if we could get standing breaks into more classes, like anatomy and physiology, because that was like the one that I hated, and I had to sit there the whole time. But mine was at 7:30 in the morning. You guys ever heard of the drink Surge? It was a Coca-Cola one that was trying to compete with Mountain Dew, and it bragged that it had more caffeine in it. And this was kind of before energy drinks were a big deal, so it was kind of the precursor to energy drinks. I would drink one of those every morning, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, for 18 weeks at 7:30 in the morning to try to stay awake in class. All right, keep it going. So sweating, we're pretty much all familiar with that one. So the hypothalamus tells you to warm up. So as your body heats up, evaporation is the best way to get it out. So those endocrine glands are going to be told. We're going to sweat all the electrolyte contents. Is all going to be be pulled out of the plasma. So sodium, calcium are going to be absorbed. Light sweating is going to be pretty diluted one. Heavy sweating is going to be less, so you're going to have more calcium or potassium and calcium loss there. So that's why not energy drinks, but sports drinks have salt and potassium in them. It's because that's what you're losing through sweat. And so when they developed that at the University of Florida, Gatorade, you realize why it's called Gatorade. Anyways, they sold it off, even though they kept the name. So that's why energy drink or sports drinks all have those in them, is to try to take everything you're sweating out, you're replenishing through liquid. So here's what a duct would look like here. You have a coil down there. You have the sympathetic nerve, so it stimulates that, tells it to absorption. When it comes in, it's going to have mostly sodium and chloride ions. And yeah, we're going to keep moving along those there. That should be a review. So sweat composition is definitely affected by training. So it's going to be more sensitive to aldosterone. Yeah. I'm bad at medical terms. I'm sorry. So you're going to reabsorb those calcium ions and chloride ions, aka conserving, holding them in. But you're going to have potassium, calcium, and magnesium are going to losses also going to be unchanged. So possibly an hourly loss of 1.6 to 2 liters. So that could be 2.5 to 3.5% of your body weight. So these basketball players, they're going to have a game here in a few hours. If they play the entire game for an hour, they could lose 2 liters of sweat in one basketball game. So you think of that, a 2-liter bottle of soda when you go to the store, that's how much they need to replenish during the game. And you see them over there with these little Gatorade cups that are like this big. I'm like, that is not enough liquid. So sweating goes up, blood volume goes down, cardiac output goes down. Severe dehydration is going to be the onset of any heat-related illness. And here's some other numbers here for how much calcium is in your sweat, chloride's in the sweat, potassium's in their sweat. So that's how many in a trained person, untrained woman to trained woman. And it's kind of interesting when it comes to, I think eventually they're going to have this there, but male to female is kind of a wash. Like men have bigger muscles, so they tend, and women have more fat, so women insulate a little better for cold, but men can generate more heat because they have bigger muscles. So it ends up being kind of a wash on the hot and cold in between there, which I don't think I'm going to get to that with all the slides that I have. Physiological responses to exercise. Fluid balance is controlled by hormones. So as you lose water, electrolytes trigger release of aldosterone and antidiuretic hormone, ADH. And so that's going to retain more sodium in the kidneys, and the antidiuretic hormone retains water at the kidneys. So trying to keep more water in your body, even though your body's evaporating it as quick as it can. So there's 6 risk factors that you need to consider, and especially if you're like a coach or an athletic director and you're going to be choosing, should we have a game or not? You need to think of, what's the metabolic heat that the body's going to have? What is the current air temperature? It could be 100 degrees, but if you have 0 humidity, it's not going to feel like it's totally 100 degrees. But if you have 100 degrees and 100% humidity, it's going to feel like it's 115. So just air temperature by itself is not enough as an AD to choose should this game happen or not. The ambient temperature is air velocity, wind. How much heat is there? Is there any shade on the field or not? Some of your big stadiums are half of the fields is going to be shaded because of the giant bleachers on all sides. So once in a while you're going to have, and some people purposely situate the direction of their football field so that the bleachers on one side are towards the sun in the evening so they can have more shade on the field. So I've seen some like soccer stadiums, some of them smaller soccer stadiums with 1,000 seats, or high school stadiums that only have 1,000 seats or so. They only have bleachers on one side and they purposely put it on the west side. And then what clothing they can wear. So I just be real cautious of those when you're choosing whether you should have a game outside or not. We actually had, when I was in Arizona, we had a team come from pretty much the Grand Canyon. They drove down to Scottsdale, so you went from 3,000 feet down to sea level. When they left, it was probably 70, 80 degrees. When they got to us, it was 95. They're not used to the heat. They had just been driving in a non-air conditioned school bus, and they played a soccer game with no subs. Those guys, we had 2 ambulances that ended up after the game. Those kids were given IVs to try to rehydrate them as quickly as possible. Those kids should not have been in that game. The problem was our athletic director didn't think about the fact that they were coming from 2 hours plus away, 30 degrees cooler probably, is the joke that we had in the summer, because it was fairly close to Prescott where the summer camp was. But we'd say it's 2 hours away and 30 degrees cooler. And if you're going from 65 degrees when you leave to 95, you didn't come prepared for that, and their bodies weren't prepared for it. Ooh, they struggled. So measuring heat, external stress. So the heat index is not necessarily the psychological stress. The best thing is a wet globe temperature. So that's going to have all the different types of heat. And you can take that wet globe equation in order to figure out how hot it is. So here's what a wet globe would look like. So you'd have the temperature will be inside the globe. They're going to be taking the water temperature and the dry temperature, and all those are going to go together to figure out. So when you see on your phone app, and it says it's 100 degrees out, and it says feels like, this is where they get that from. It's from a wet globe temperature. Keeping going. So there are the serious ones, and these we talk about in pretty much every single health class that you've ever had. So heat cramps are when your muscles are going to be going crazy. We talked about that the other day. Most commonly in heavy stress, heavy sweaters. Drink a lot of water, maybe some sodium tablets. Is going to make a big part of that. Heat exhaustion is when it gets further. So this is where you're going to have dizziness, nausea, vomiting. Those kids in that football game or that soccer game they were throwing up on the field. That was kind of the first clue that something was wrong with these students, poor kids. So caused by severe dehydration from sweating. And I'm saying those kids were definitely heat exhausted, and that's why we had 2 ambulances there and IVs. We ended up putting them up in the dorm, if I remember right, because it was a fairly late, and they had a 2+ hour drive, so they slept in dorm rooms. Joys of being a boarding school. Simultaneous blood flow needs of the muscles and skin do not meet because of the low blood volume, and all the mechanisms are pretty much overwhelmed. When it gets really bad is when that heat stroke, so this would be past the point of calling 911 or having just to say we just had paramedics there giving fluids to the players. If they had actually passed out from heat exhaustion, that's when you worry about heat stroke. That's when they get taken to the hospital immediately. So this is where that core temperature is getting above 40, where we're saying the brain shuts down at 41. So when you're getting real close to that, they get confused, disoriented, unconscious. Hikers, when they get to this point, get really disoriented, and they'll start just hiking the wrong direction when somebody gets to hit that heat stroke. If you don't treat it, you could have a coma and you could die. So this is where cooling the body as quickly as possible, putting them in a cold bath, dunking them in a lake if they're hiking. And here's what that could all look like there. He starts with heat cramps, and here's some of those warning signs. Then you get to heat, exhaustion, nausea, chills, goosebumps. Yeah, if somebody's got goosebumps on the field and it's hot outside, that is immediately get them someplace cooler. If they have headaches, yeah, same thing. And that can get really bad when you lose consciousness, confused. When sweating stops. If they have goosebumps and their sweating stops and it's hot out, that's when I'd be calling 911 as a coach. So the hyperthermia, basically never restrict fluid intake is what I want you to know from this. It used to be a thing like, you need to earn your water, is what coaches used to do. And I had at least one coach in my life that's how they were. They would restrict the fact that you could have water. I hope that's never happened to any one of you. I hope that we've gotten past that in our coaching communities. But yeah, don't restrict water of your players. If they say they're thirsty, they probably needed it a while ago. Is pretty much what I do. And I have to schedule water breaks into my practices because I will forget as a coach. So I will have them run a drill, and usually when I'm switching to a different, offense to defense. And that's when I'm like, go get a drink first. And back and forth like that. Not making them wear pads when they're playing football for practice as much as you can is going to help with that as well. Here was the one, as promised. This chart is probably the biggest one you need to know as a coach or an athletic director or just a fitness professional in general. This is a temperature of an athlete when they have fluids or not. So this was used at a rectal thermometer, which is the best way to take, I know it sounds weird. So when they had fluids, and this is in a 2-hour running time, so I would assume this was a jog on a treadmill. They're with fluids at 60 minutes, it kind of plateaued for their body temperature, and it stayed under 39. And remember we were saying 40 to 41 is when your body's going to start passing out. Without fluids, the athletes was getting above that 40 degrees there, and that's where it gets really dangerous. So, just the difference is 1.5 degrees, so that's probably 5 degrees in Fahrenheit. Maybe a little more than that. So, big difference whether in the temperature of your athletes or of your person you're training with liquid or not. So this is why never restrict fluids for an athlete. So guidelines for practicing in heat. Whew, I haven't even made it to cold yet. So events should not take place during the hottest part of the day and avoid a wet globe temperature of 28. To me, that was above 90 is what I did as a physical education teacher. If it was above 90, we were indoors. And in Mississippi, where it was 100% humidity, I started the school year with intramurals and my physical education classes were inside. And then when it cooled off, we'd go outside. And at the end of the quarter or semester, whatever we call them, like November, December, then I'd end up back inside again. But I had COVID one year. We couldn't do anything inside. So I did all outside in Mississippi all the way through December. And I also had no gym for one of the years there for a semester because they were redoing the roof. So again, all through the winter, I was outside for physical education. And a few days it was a little too cold and we went in to use the weight room. But other than that, make sure you got plenty of fluids. Be aware of all those heat illnesses. Organizers should get the final call on stopping events. Don't let the athletes have the choice if they should participate or not. They're all going to say we'd rather play. So so you can, this is what we were saying earlier, that it is possible to acclimatize yourself to heat. So in the short term, you can acclimatize in 9 to 14 days. So a week to a week and a half. Acclimatization, though, is long term, so months or years. So you'll notice I did have to laugh at some of my older friends in Arizona in the 2 years we lived there. The music teacher. He had been there for 6 or 7 years, and we would go to coffee every Friday at like 10 o'clock when we had there was a Starbucks like from here to the gas station from the edge of campus. So we would go in our 40-minute free periods. We'd go get coffee at 10 in the morning. And we would sit outside, and I'd be in shorts and short sleeves at 70 degrees in Arizona. He's got long pants, long sleeves, and a jacket on. I'm like, wow, you have acclimatized to a warm climate, haven't you? He's like, tragically, yes. So, as I say, when you start acclimatizing, your cardiovascular function gets better. You have changes in your sweat rate and your sweat contents and your lower core temperature during exercise. So other things, your plasma volume will go up due to your being used to that chronic physical activity. It is a temporary thing. It'll go back down after 10 days. Buys times for other adaptations to occur. Heart rate will go down, cardiac goes up, and these are the same as any exercise, but you actually get used to the temperature that you're going at. Widespread sweating is going to happen earlier. Boy, did I notice that in Mississippi. By the end of year 2, so like right before we moved, I would take my son out for a walk. So school there ended at like May 7th. It was really early and this is high school. But we also started on August 3rd. So we started really early. But I was taking my son for a walk, finishing my grad school stuff. One of the classes was 4 book reports was the whole class. And so I would put an audio book in, and I would take him for walks at like 7:30 in the morning. And this is when he's just over a year old. And the moment I walked outside, it's 8 o'clock in the morning or less, trying to get him away so my wife could sleep. And I'm listening to this. And the moment I walked outside, I felt like I started sweating. I'm like, oh, yeah. So that part of that was my body just being used to summers in Mississippi and 100% humidity. We moved here, and it was 100 degrees when we moved in. And I felt it was cooler here than it was when we moved out at 90 degrees in Mississippi. Let's say this would be the temperature of over an hour and a half. So an unacclimatized person couldn't even finish the whole test. Heart rate, same concept. So here's the final rector temperature. This is how long it took them to acclimatize. Whew. Let me see if I got any more good ones here. I kind of already mentioned that about females. Man, you're going to have to study the cold part on your own, guys. I talked way too much. I didn't even get to the video. I had a great Big Bang Theory clip for you guys. It's a long. This is another one of those long. I probably should make this a 2-day lecture because I could probably go a whole